Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Six years ago, my wife and I were house hunting in what seemed like the perfect neighborhood. We'd been burned before by a previous homeowners association that nickel and dimed us for everything from mailbox colors to grass height. So when our realtor mentioned this particular neighborhood had no homeowners association, we were thrilled. I remember walking through the open house, admiring the spacious kitchen and the way natural light flooded the living room. But what really sealed the deal was when I asked the listing agent point blank about any homeowners association fees or restrictions. She told me there was no homeowners association and said that was actually one of the selling points of the neighborhood. My wife and I exchanged excited looks. Finally, a place where we could paint our front door whatever color we wanted and not worry about some busybody neighbor reporting us for having our trash cans out an hour too early. We closed on the house 3 months later and spent the first year blissfully unaware of any neighborhood drama. We planted a garden, installed a fire pit in the backyard, and even put up a small shed without asking anyone's permission. Life was good. Then we started getting mail. It began with welcome packets from something called the Willowbrook Homeowners Association. I figured it was just a case of mistaken identity, maybe mail meant for the previous owners. But the letters kept coming, followed by emails about neighborhood meetings and annual dues. Confused, I called the management company listed on the letterhead. I explained that I thought there was a mistake since I kept getting mail about homeowners association dues, but my house wasn't part of any homeowners association. After a few minutes on hold, the representative came back with news that made my stomach drop. She told me that my neighborhood did indeed have an homeowners association, but my property, along with about 12 others, were exempt due to being built by Cornerstone Construction before they withdrew from the development. I asked her about the realtor, specifically telling us there was no homeowners association. The representative explained that this was technically correct for my specific property, since the original builder had different agreements that grandfathered certain homes out of the homeowners association requirements. So there we were, living in a neighborhood with an homeowners association that we weren't technically part of, but surrounded by neighbors who were. It was like being Switzerland in the middle of Europe, neutral but not immune to the politics around us. For the first few years, this arrangement worked out fine. We joined the neighborhood Facebook page to stay informed about community events and local news. Most of our neighbors were friendly, and the homeowners association seemed to run things smoothly without being too overbearing. Then the complaints started. There was this one guy, probably in his 70s, who seemed to have appointed himself as the neighborhood watchdog. Every week, sometimes daily, he'd post long rants on the Facebook page about everything wrong with how the homeowners association was being run. He would complain that the management company was completely useless and that they charged extra for landscaping that looked worse than before. He'd rant about paying outrageous fees when the playground equipment was falling apart. He constantly boasted about how the board members didn't listen to residents and called the whole homeowners association a complete scam. At first, I actually felt bad for the guy. He clearly felt unheard and frustrated with how his money was being spent. But then his posts started getting more frequent and more bitter. He wrote long posts about fighting the corrupt homeowners association for 3 years with nothing changing. He complained that they wouldn't even return his phone calls anymore and questioned what residents were paying for. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was someone who clearly despised being part of the homeowners association, constantly complaining about every aspect of it, yet he kept paying his dues and attending meetings. I started to wonder why he didn't just move somewhere without an homeowners association if he hated it so much. Then came the post that really caught my attention. He wrote about how he'd been thinking about the exempt houses in the neighborhood. He said it wasn't fair that they got to enjoy all the benefits of the maintained common areas and landscaping without contributing. He announced that the neighborhood needed to find a way to make them join the homeowners association. I stared at my phone. This was the same person who spent every day complaining about how terrible the homeowners association was, and now he wanted to force us into it. Within hours, the comments section exploded. Some neighbors agreed that it was a good point and questioned why exempt houses should get a free ride. Others disagreed and said they didn't think it was legal since those houses were specifically excluded for a reason. The old man responded that he was going to research it and insisted there had to be some way to make things fair for everyone. Over the next few weeks, his crusade intensified. He started posting links to legal articles about homeowners association expansion, contacted local attorneys, and even showed up at county planning meetings. He posted about finding a lawyer who thought they might have a case, claiming that the exempt houses were definitely benefiting from the landscaping and maintenance paid for by homeowners association fees. I finally responded to one of his posts, pointing out that we maintained our own landscaping and didn't use any of the common areas that their fees paid for. He shot back that it wasn't the point and insisted we were still part of the neighborhood regardless. The conversation got heated from there, with him insisting that we were somehow cheating the system by living in houses that were legally exempt from homeowners association requirements. What really got to me was the sheer hypocrisy of it all. This man spent literally every day posting about how much he hated the homeowners association, how incompetent the management company was, how the board members were corrupt, and how the fees were a waste of money. But the moment he realized some of his neighbors didn't have to deal with any of that, suddenly he wanted us to suffer through it too. He announced he was calling an emergency meeting to discuss the exempt house situation. A board member responded that they'd already looked into this extensively and that those houses had legal exemptions that couldn't be overturned. The old man declared that maybe they should stop maintaining anything that benefits the exempt houses. I pointed out that the city maintained the streets and the sidewalks were also city property. The meeting, according to neighbors who attended, was a disaster. He spent 2 hours presenting a PowerPoint presentation about neighborhood fairness, while the board members and management company repeatedly explained that legal exemptions couldn't simply be ignored because he felt they were unfair. But he didn't give up. For months, he continued his campaign, posting daily updates about his research, sharing legal documents he'd found online, and trying to rally other neighbors to his cause. The breaking point came when he actually hired a lawyer and sent threatening letters to all the exempt houses, claiming we were in violation of neighborhood covenants and demanding we join the homeowners association immediately or face legal action. I decided I'd had enough of his nonsense. I called the attorney whose name was on the letterhead. I told him I'd received a letter from his office about homeowners association requirements and wanted to clarify something. The attorney was surprisingly honest about the Willowbrook situation. He admitted that my neighbor had a very weak case and that the exemptions were ironclad. When I asked why he'd sent the letter, he explained that the old man had paid him to send it. The attorney had advised him it was unlikely to accomplish anything, but the neighbor had insisted anyway. Armed with this information, I decided to attend the next homeowners association meeting myself. I'd never been to one before, but I figured it was time to address the situation directly. The meeting was held in the community center with about 30 neighbors in attendance. The agenda covered the usual topics: budget reviews, landscaping updates, and maintenance schedules. Then came the moment I've been waiting for. The board president announced that they had one resident who wanted to discuss the exempt properties again. The old man thanked everyone and launched into his usual speech. He talked about working tirelessly to address the unfair situation with certain houses that refused to contribute to the community. He went through the same presentation I'd heard about, complete with printed handouts and charts showing how much money the homeowners association was supposedly losing by not collecting dues from exempt houses. When he finished, the board president asked if anyone else had comments. I said I did and stood up, pulling out my phone. I told everyone I wanted to read something to them. I explained that these were posts from the neighborhood Facebook page, all from the same person who had just spoken. I began reading his greatest hits: complaints about management company incompetence, rants about wasted money, accusations of board corruption, and demands for fee reductions. I pointed out that these posts spanned the last 2 years. I explained that the same person who had just spent 20 minutes trying to convince everyone to join the homeowners association had spent the last 2 years telling everyone how terrible it was. The room fell silent. I could see neighbors looking back and forth between me and him, the contradiction finally sinking in. I continued by saying I'd spoken with his attorney, who had told me the case had no legal merit and had advised against pursuing it. I revealed that the old man had paid the lawyer to send threatening letters anyway. I told the room that he hated the homeowners association so much that he wanted to force other people to join it. I said this wasn't about fairness but about misery-loving company. The board president cleared his throat and said that the legal exemptions for certain properties were binding and could not be changed. He declared the matter closed. The next day, the Facebook page was unusually quiet. No long rants, no legal research posts, no complaints about homeowners association incompetence. For the first time in years, there was actual peace. I teach at a private college and have been there for 15 years now. It comes with one incredible perk. My kids can attend my college for free. Completely free. We're talking about a school that charges $55,000 a year in tuition alone. When I took this job, I had 2 young kids and a marriage that was already showing cracks. I knew the teaching salary wasn't great, but I stayed because of that benefit. I figured it would be my kids' ticket to a debt-free education. Fast forward to now. My ex-wife and I divorced 8 years ago, and both our kids are college age. My older child just finished their freshman year at a community college, and my younger one is a senior in high school. When we got divorced, we agreed that education costs would be handled separately, but we'd both contribute what we could. At the time, I thought this would be simple. Free college for both kids at my school. Problem solved. But my kids had other plans. It started with a family meeting at my ex-wife's house 3 months ago. Both kids were there, looking uncomfortable. My ex-wife had that look on her face that I recognized from our marriage, the one that meant she'd already made up her mind about something and was just going through the motions of discussing it. She told me we needed to talk about college plans for next year. I mentioned that both kids knew about the free tuition at my college and asked if they'd looked at the programs there. My older child said they'd already talked about this and that my college didn't have the programs they wanted. My younger child chimed in that it wasn't the right fit for them. I felt my stomach drop. I've been expecting this conversation, but I'd hoped maybe one of them would at least consider it. I brought up the exchange colleges and explained that there were 12 schools in our network where they could attend for just a few thousand a year. My older child said they'd looked at those too and none of them had what they were looking for. My ex-wife leaned forward with that satisfied smile I remembered all too well. She explained her plan. The state college had great programs for both of them, she said. Tuition plus room and board came to about $30,000 per year per kid. I did the math out loud. $30,000 each meant $60,000 total per year. She confirmed this and suggested we split it down the middle. That would be $30,000 each for both of us, or $15,000 per kid, per parent, per year. I sat there calculating in my head. $30,000 was more than a third of my annual salary. For both kids over 4 years, we were talking about $250,000 total. I told her that was a lot of money and reminded her that my salary wasn't that high. She acknowledged this but said education was important. She also mentioned that she made even less than I did, but was still willing to make the sacrifice. There it was, the guilt trip. The implication that if I wasn't willing to pay, I didn't care about my kids' education. My younger child told me that their mother had already said she'd find a way to cover her half, no matter what. I asked what they meant by that. My ex-wife explained that she would pay whatever I decided to contribute and would somehow handle the rest. Even if I only paid $5,000 a year per kid, she would make it work. The way she said it made it clear that paying only $5,000 would make me the villain in this story. My kids were looking at me expectantly, and I could see they'd already been sold on this plan. I asked if we could take some time to think about this. She agreed but pointed out that the kids needed to submit their deposits soon. The deadline was in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. She timed this perfectly, giving me just enough time to feel pressured, but not enough time to come up with alternatives. I spent those 2 weeks feeling like a complete jerk. Here I was, a college educator, seemingly standing in the way of my kids' education. But every time I looked at my budget, the numbers just didn't work. $30,000 would mean taking out loans, draining my retirement savings, or picking up a second job. All for something my kids could get for free if they'd just be a little flexible. I called my ex-wife the night before the deadline. I told her I needed to understand why the kids couldn't at least consider my college or one of the exchange schools. She said it was because they were adults and got to choose their own path. I couldn't force them into schools they didn't want to attend just because it was convenient for me. I explained that it wasn't about convenience but about financial reality. I literally could not afford $15,000 per year per kid. She said that was my choice and reminded me that she'd already told the kids she would cover whatever I didn't pay. I asked how exactly she was planning to do that since she made less than I did. She said she would figure it out. Maybe she would get a second job or take out loans. At least she was putting her kids first. There it was again. The implication that I wasn't putting my kids first if I couldn't magically produce money I didn't have. The next day, I made a decision. I called a family meeting of my own. I told them I'd thought about this a lot and explained what I could do. I would pay $5,000 per year per kid toward their state college education. Both kids looked disappointed, and my ex-wife looked smug. She said that at least I was contributing something. I said I had a condition. I wanted to see exactly how she planned to cover the remaining $25,000 per kid per year. I wanted to see the loan applications, the second job offer letters, whatever the plan was. She told me that was none of my business. I disagreed. I explained that it was my business because if she couldn't cover it and the kids ended up with massive debt, that would affect them for decades. So I wanted to see the plan. My ex-wife went red. She hadn't expected me to call her bluff. She said fine and promised to show me her financial plan the next week. But next week came and went with excuses. The week after that brought more excuses. Finally, 3 weeks later, she admitted the truth. She said she didn't have a solid plan yet, but she would figure something out. That's when I realized what was happening. She'd told the kids it was a done deal, banking on the fact that I'd feel too guilty to let them down. She was counting on me to cave and pay the full $15,000 per kid, leaving her to only cover her smaller portion. I made another decision. I called the kids directly. I told them I wanted to show them something and asked them to sit down so we could look at actual numbers. I laid out my budget for them, my salary, my expenses, what $30,000 would mean for our family's financial stability. I explained that if I paid this much, I would have to take out loans too, or I would have to work a second job and wouldn't be available for family time. Or I would have to delay my retirement by 10 years. Then I showed them the cost comparison. My college cost $0. Exchange colleges cost $3,000 per year maximum. State college cost $30,000 per year. Community college for 2 years, then transfer would total $15,000 for 4 years. My older child said they didn't realize it would be such a burden. I told them what I was willing to do. I would pay up to $10,000 per year per kid, but only if they seriously considered the free and low-cost options first. They needed to visit my college and visit 3 of the exchange colleges. If they could honestly tell me after visiting that none of them would work for their goals, then we would talk about the state college. It took some convincing, but they agreed to visit the schools. The younger one ended up finding a program at one of the exchange colleges that was better than what the state college offered. The older one decided to transfer to my college after seeing that they could design their own interdisciplinary major. When my ex-wife found out, she was furious. She accused me of manipulating them into choosing cheaper schools. I told her that I had given them information they needed to make decisions. Information she didn't want them to have. She said I had made her look like a liar. I responded that she had made herself look like a liar when she promised to pay money she didn't have. Both kids are thriving now. The older one loves the small class sizes at my college and has become close with several professors. The younger one is excited about their program and the study abroad opportunities at the exchange college. They'll both graduate debt-free. My ex-wife barely speaks to me now, but that's probably for the best. The kids have thanked me multiple times for pushing them to explore their options. They've realized that the most expensive choice isn't always the best choice. I inherited my grandmother's house 6 years ago when she passed away. It's this beautiful Victorian home right in the center of our small town with a big wraparound porch and a huge backyard. My grandmother used to host the annual town picnic there every summer for like 30 years. After she died, I kept up the tradition because it meant a lot to the community and to her memory. The house sits on Main Street, right across from the town hall, so it's pretty visible to everyone. I put a lot of work into maintaining it, new paint, fixed the roof, restored the original hardwood floors. It's my pride and joy, and honestly, it's probably worth more than I'll ever make in my lifetime. Now our town is pretty small, maybe 1,500 people, so everyone knows everyone. We just had our municipal elections 2 months before this incident happened. The new mayor is this nice older gentleman who used to run the hardware store. Real down-to-earth guy who actually cares about the community. Anyway, I was out front watering my flower beds on a Tuesday morning when this woman I'd never seen before came walking up my driveway. She was probably in her 50s, wearing this expensive-looking business suit that seemed way too fancy for our little town. She had this attitude about her right from the start, like she owned the place. She asked if I was the homeowner, and when I said yes and asked if I could help her, she told me she was the new mayor of the town. She said my property had been selected for the upcoming Heritage Festival next weekend. I was confused because I knew who our mayor was, and it definitely wasn't this woman. Plus, the Heritage Festival wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 months. I told her there had been some mistake because our mayor was Mr. Johnson and the Heritage Festival wasn't until October. She claimed that Mr. Johnson had stepped down last week due to health issues and that the town council had appointed her as interim mayor. She also said they'd move the festival up due to scheduling conflicts. Something felt really off about this. Mr. Johnson seemed perfectly healthy when I saw him at the grocery store just 2 days ago. I asked if she had any official documentation or some kind of ID or paperwork. She said she didn't need to show me anything and that she was giving me a direct order from the mayor's office. She demanded that I hand over my keys so they could start setting up for the festival. She said they would need full access to my house and grounds for the next week. I told her that even if she was the mayor, which I seriously doubted, she couldn't just demand someone's keys. That wasn't how any of this worked. She asked if I was refusing a direct order from the mayor, and I said yes, I was. I explained that she wasn't the mayor, and even if she were, she had no legal right to my property. She said this was ridiculous, and that she was calling the police to have me removed for obstructing official city business. She actually pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there on my lawn. She told the dispatcher that she needed police assistance immediately because she was Mayor Karen Williams and had a resident who was refusing to comply with official city orders. She said I was being hostile and uncooperative. The dispatcher must have asked her something because she gave them my address and kept insisting she was the mayor. Then she told them the situation was escalating, that I was becoming aggressive, and she feared for her safety. I wasn't being aggressive at all. I was just standing there with my watering can, completely bewildered by this whole situation. I told her she was lying to the police and that was a serious crime. She got angry and told me not to dare accuse her of lying. She insisted she was the legally appointed mayor of the town and that I would respect her authority. Within 10 minutes, 2 police cars pulled up. Officer Martinez, who I've known since high school, got out of the first car with his partner. He greeted me and said they got a call about some kind of dispute. Karen immediately told the officer that thank God he was there. She explained that I was refusing to comply with direct orders from the mayor's office. She said she had instructed me to surrender my keys for official city business, and I was being completely uncooperative. Officer Martinez asked who she was, and she introduced herself as Mayor Karen Williams. She claimed she was just appointed by the town council after Mr. Johnson's sudden resignation. Officer Martinez looked at me with this expression like he was trying not to laugh. He asked if this woman was bothering me. I explained that she had showed up demanding my house keys while claiming she was the mayor. I said she had been threatening me and now she had lied to the police about being threatened herself. Officer Martinez told her he was going to need to see some identification and official documentation of her appointment as mayor. She said she didn't have to show him anything because she was his superior as the elected official of the town. Officer Martinez explained that wasn't how this worked. He also mentioned that, for the record, Mr. Johnson was still very much our mayor because he had just seen him at the station yesterday. She insisted that was impossible because the town council had called her personally. The second officer, who I didn't recognize, stepped forward and told her that making false claims to a police officer and filing false reports were serious charges. He said she needed to calm down and explain what was really going on. She demanded to speak to their supervisor immediately and claimed this was harassment of an elected official. Officer Martinez told her she wasn't an elected official. He explained that she was trespassing on my property and making false claims to police. He said he was going to need her to step off the property now. She said she would not move from city property. Officer Thompson told her this was private property and that she needed to leave immediately or she would be arrested for trespassing. She yelled that they couldn't arrest the mayor. That's when she really lost it. She started screaming about her rights and how the whole town was conspiring against her. She refused to leave my property and kept insisting she was the mayor. The officers had no choice but to arrest her. When they put her in handcuffs, she kept yelling about lawsuits and corruption. The neighbors were all coming out to see what the commotion was about. It was quite the scene. Officer Martinez apologized for all the trouble and said they would need a statement from me about what happened. I told him, of course, and asked if she was actually mentally ill or just really entitled. He said it was hard to say and could be both. He mentioned they had been getting weird reports about her all week because she had been going around town claiming to be in charge of various things. This was the first time she had actually committed any crimes though. After they took her away, I found out from the neighbors that she had been living in the motel on the highway for about a month. Apparently, she had been telling people she was sent by the state government to evaluate our town's management. Some folks believed her at first because she seemed so confident and official. I gave my statement to the police, and they told me she was being charged with filing false reports, trespassing, and attempting to impersonate a public official. Apparently, those are pretty serious charges that can carry jail time. Officer Martinez called me a few days later to update me. Turns out the woman had some kind of mental breakdown and genuinely believed she had been appointed mayor. The court ordered a psychological evaluation, and she was placed in a facility for treatment. I never did find out what her real story was or where she came from. Officer Martinez said they were trying to contact her family, but I didn't follow up after that. Honestly, I just wanted the whole thing to be over with. The real mayor, Mr. Johnson, stopped by a week later to apologize for the confusion and to make sure I was still planning to host the actual Heritage Festival in October. Of course, I said yes, my grandmother would have wanted the tradition to continue. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac where everyone knows everyone, but we mostly keep to ourselves. The houses are pretty close together, and parking can be a real pain since the street is narrow and there's limited space. That's why every house has its own driveway, which was a huge selling point for me when I bought the place 3 years ago. My driveway can easily fit 2 cars, which was perfect since I was planning to get a second vehicle eventually. For now though, I just have my old sedan, so the second spot sits empty most of the time. The problem started about a month ago. I was working in my home office when I heard a car door slam outside. I looked out my window and saw a red pickup truck parked in the empty spot of my driveway. I figured someone was just visiting one of my neighbors and made a mistake, so I didn't think much of it. The truck was gone by the time I finished work that evening, but then it happened again the next day, and the day after that. By the 4th day, I realized this wasn't a mistake. The truck belonged to my next-door neighbor's teenage son, and he was treating my driveway like his personal parking spot. I watched from my window as he casually got out of the truck, grabbed his backpack, and walked over to his house like he owned the place. I prefer to give people the benefit of the doubt and handle things diplomatically, so I decided to have a polite conversation with my neighbor about the situation. I'd only spoken to her a few times since moving in, but she seemed nice enough during our brief chats about the weather and neighborhood gossip. I walked over to her house that evening and knocked on the door. She answered with a friendly smile, but that changed quickly when I brought up the parking situation. I explained politely that I'd noticed her son parking in my driveway and asked if she could tell him to use their own driveway instead. Her response floored me. She told me I wasn't using the space anyway, as if that somehow made it okay for her son to take it. When I explained that it was still my property regardless of whether I was using it, she got defensive and claimed I didn't actually own the parking space. She said it was just a convenience and that we were all neighbors. I tried to be patient and explained again that this was my private property and no one should use it without permission. She argued back that there was limited street parking and I was wasting the space. She said her son needed somewhere to park his truck since their own driveway was full with their 2 cars. I told her that wasn't my problem to solve and that I was asking nicely for her son to stop parking on my property. That's when she really showed her true colors. She got angry and told me not to expect them to be friendly neighbors anymore if I was going to be difficult about this. I was so stunned by her attitude that I just turned around and walked back to my house while she was still talking. The next morning, the red truck was back in my driveway. Clearly, she hadn't bothered to talk to her son, or if she had, they'd both decided to ignore my request. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went to the hardware store and bought a set of orange traffic cones. That evening, I placed them strategically in the empty spot to block access. Problem solved? Or so I thought. The next morning, I looked out my window to see the red truck parked in my driveway again. The traffic cones were scattered on my lawn like someone had just pushed them out of the way. The audacity was unbelievable. I decided it was time to get serious. I ordered a security camera online and an official-looking sign that read, "No parking private property." The camera would let me monitor what was happening when I wasn't looking, and the sign would make it crystal clear that this wasn't a public parking space. When the items arrived, I spent an afternoon installing the camera with a clear view of my driveway and mounting the sign on a metal post right at the entrance. The sign was bright yellow with bold black letters that couldn't be missed. I felt pretty good about my solution. Surely this would get the message across. 2 days later, I found a handwritten note stuck to my front door with packing tape. The handwriting was clearly feminine, so I knew it was from my neighbor. The note called my behavior petty and unneighborly. She wrote that they used to have such a nice, friendly community, but people like me were ruining it with selfish attitudes. She said it was just a parking space that I wasn't even using, and told me to grow up. I stood there holding the note, feeling my blood pressure rise. This woman had the nerve to call me petty. Her son had been stealing my parking space for weeks without asking. She'd been rude and dismissive when I politely asked her to stop, and now she was calling me the problem. I checked my security camera footage from that morning. Sure enough, there was clear video of her son pulling into my driveway, getting out of his truck, looking directly at my new sign, and then walking to his house like nothing had happened. About an hour later, I watched as she walked over to my driveway, read my sign, and then proceeded to move my traffic cones again. I saved the footage and decided to do some research. I looked up my property deed and local parking laws. Everything confirmed what I already knew. My driveway was 100% on my private property, and I had every right to control who parked there. The next time I saw the truck in my driveway, I was ready. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The officer who responded was very understanding when I told him about the ongoing trespassing and showed him my video evidence of them ignoring my sign and moving my cones. The officer asked if they'd been using my driveway without permission after I'd asked them to stop multiple times. When I said yes and mentioned I had video evidence, he asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked across at my neighbor's house where I could see her peeking through her curtains and told him to start with a warning but document it in case this continued. The officer walked over and knocked on their door. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see my neighbor gesturing angrily and pointing at my house. Her son appeared looking embarrassed and sulky. After about 10 minutes, the officer came back and told me he'd explained the law to them. He said the mother seemed genuinely surprised to learn that driveways were private property. The son would move his truck immediately, and they'd been warned that any future incidents could result in trespassing charges. Within 5 minutes, the red truck was gone from my driveway. I haven't seen it there since. My neighbor won't make eye contact with me anymore, but honestly, that's fine by me. The security camera stays up and so does the sign. The store I worked at was one of those mid-sized places that gets absolutely packed during lunch hours and weekends. We had 4 registers total, but management was always trying to save on labor costs. So most of the time, we only had 2 registers open. I was what they called second on call, which meant I spent most of my shift stocking shelves and doing other tasks around the store. But when the main register got backed up with more than 5 people in line, I had to drop whatever I was doing and open up register 2. The training they gave us was pretty basic. When opening a second register, the rule was simple. Gesture to the next person in the existing line and tell them you could help them at the other register. It wasn't rocket science, and most customers understood how it worked. Most customers. This day was a Saturday afternoon and the store was busier than usual. I was in the back organizing the storage room when I heard my manager calling for the second register to come to the front over the intercom. I dropped the box of cereal I was holding and jogged up to the front. The main register had about 8 people in line and my coworker looked stressed. I quickly logged into register 2 and looked at the line to see who should come next. There was this older gentleman, probably in his 70s, standing third in line with a small basket of groceries. He had the kind of weathered hands that told you he'd worked hard his whole life, and he was patiently waiting his turn. Behind him stood a woman who looked to be in her 40s, wearing expensive-looking clothes and checking her phone constantly. I gestured toward the older man and told him I could help him over at register 2. The gentleman smiled and started gathering his items from where he'd set his basket down. He moved a bit slowly, taking his time to make sure he had everything. That's when Karen decided to make her move. She pushed past the older man and threw her stuff onto my conveyor belt with a loud thud that made everyone in the area look over. I politely told her that the gentleman was next in line, but she quickly shot back with some saying about life being for the quick ones. She said it with this smug smile on her face, like she'd just delivered the world's most clever comeback. The older gentleman had stopped gathering his things and was looking at the situation with raised eyebrows. I felt my face getting hot. I'd dealt with rude customers before, but something about the way she just dismissed this polite older man really got to me. I looked over at him, hoping he might speak up for himself. I told him again that he was definitely next and that I had called him over specifically. The older man just waved his hand dismissively and smiled. He told me it was okay and to let the lady go ahead because he wasn't in any hurry. That made me even more annoyed. Here was this sweet old guy being completely gracious to someone who absolutely didn't deserve it. But he'd made his choice, and I wasn't going to cause a scene in front of a bunch of customers. I reluctantly agreed to help Karen first, telling the gentleman I'd help him right after if he was sure about letting her go. I started scanning Karen's items, trying to keep my professional composure. She had a cart full of organic this and premium that. Everything was name brand and expensive. She kept checking her phone while I worked, not even acknowledging me except to huff impatiently when I had to look up a produce code. When I finished scanning everything, the total came to $47.38. I told her the total, and she pulled out her wallet and handed me a $50 bill without looking up from her phone. I opened the register and started counting out her change, $2.62. I had it already in my hand when she suddenly looked up. She told me to wait because she thought she could probably match the exact change. She started digging through her oversized purse, pulling out receipts, lip balm, and a bunch of other stuff. I stood there holding her change, waiting. She explained that she thought she had 38 cents somewhere in her purse and asked me to hold on. She was taking forever, dumping the contents of her purse onto the counter next to the register. Coins were rolling everywhere, and she was holding up the line behind her. The older gentleman was still waiting patiently, but I could see other customers getting restless. I'd had enough. I looked at Karen, who was still frantically searching through her pile of purse contents, and I made my decision. I gently but placed her change down on the counter in front of her with a little tap and told her that life was for the quick ones. I said it with the biggest, most innocent smile I could manage. For a moment, she just stared at me like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Her mouth actually fell open a little bit. She asked me what I had just said. I told her that her change was $2.62 and wished her a great day. I was still smiling, but I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly what had just happened. She'd been served her own medicine, and it clearly didn't taste very good. She started yelling about how ridiculous this was and demanded to speak to my manager. I told her that he was busy right now, but she was welcome to wait in customer service if she wanted to file a complaint. She started shoving her purse contents back into her bag. She grabbed her change and her receipt and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking angrily on the tile floor. When she was gone, the older gentleman approached my register with his small basket. He told me that what I had done was beautiful, just beautiful. He was grinning from ear to ear and gave me a big thumbs up. A few other customers in line were smiling and nodding approvingly. He explained that he'd been watching people like her cut in line his whole life, and it was nice to see someone give it right back to them. I admitted that I probably shouldn't have done that because I could get in trouble if she complained. He told me that sometimes doing the right thing is worth a little risk, and that I had handled the situation perfectly. I rang up his groceries and we chatted a bit while I bagged his items. He told me he was a retired carpenter who came to our store every Saturday to buy groceries for himself and his elderly neighbor who couldn't drive anymore. The kind of guy who deserved way better treatment than what Karen had shown him. After he left, my manager came over to check on me. He asked if everything was okay because he had seen some kind of commotion. I told him it was just a difficult customer, but nothing I couldn't handle. He said that was good and told me to keep up the good work. Karen never did file a complaint, at least not that I heard about. I kept working at that store for another 2 years and I never saw her again. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.